This content was adapted from the National Center on Intensive Intervention's Introduction to Intensive Intervention module. It was adapted to fit Rhode Island's interconnected systems. Meet Elijah. Elijah is a second grader. He is creative and loves art. He is also a strong chess player and enjoys reading graphic novels. He meets or exceeds benchmarks in both reading and math and attends school regularly. His language skills appear age-appropriate and he does not have an IEP at this time. Recently, though, Elijah received 3 minor office discipline referrals in the last month, so he was flagged by decision rules as needing support. The ODRs were for refusing to do work by telling the teacher no and whining when asked to complete assignments. He also had an issue or two with arguing with peers. As part of their school-wide behavior system, school-wide expectations were collaboratively developed with staff and students and have been taught and reinforced. Staff believe kids do well if they can. The teacher meets privately with Elijah, shares her concern, and asks Elijah for his perspective. Elijah says, "I don't know," and starts to shut down. This is really not like Elijah, his teacher reflects. Normally he's open with and seems to like talking with adults, including this teacher. Clearly, the Tier 1 Universal Social Emotional Behavioral Core isn't enough and he's struggling. He needs support. Tier 2 are standard protocol interventions targeted to need and delivered with fidelity. These are provided in addition to Tier 1 for some students whose data indicates Tier 1 alone isn't enough. In data-based individualization, or DBI, the validated process through which we intensify and individualize at Tier 3, if needed, the Validated Intervention Program platform is the first step of that process. At this school, the intervention check-in check-out is used as an initial gate for all social, emotional, and behavioral needs that aren't urgent or a safety matter, and therefore requiring more intensive response right away. But this isn't always the case. There are other validated intervention programs that might be the starting point of your DBI process. Elijah's teacher fills out the school's family letter notifying them of the check-in check-out intervention. This letter outlines the school family communication and the support that the school asks for from the family. The teacher plans to call the family later this week to see if they have any questions, concerns, or insights to share. Check-in check-out is most effective for externalizing behaviors with students who have the skills but aren't performing and isn't doing, and when the student seeks adult attention. Its effect size is also stronger with elementary students. Check-in check-out is not effective for internalizing behavior, escape or peer-maintained behaviors, or with students who simply don't have the skill, a can't do. It also isn't an intensive behavior intervention. While the team isn't sure and the school isn't sure if check-in check-out fits Elijah's needs yet, this school uses check-in check-out as a first gate because it can be quickly implemented, ensures that the Tier 1 Universal Academic and Social Emotional Behavioral Core is being implemented, taught, and reinforced, and when we implement check-in check-out, we collect additional data with more detail to support next steps if we find that this alone is not effective. The components of check-in check-out include a staff member who has a good relationship with the student checks in to get ready for the day. This mentor provides encouragement, prompts, pre-correction all around the school-wide expectations. This ensures that Tier 1 is implemented with fidelity. Then, throughout the day, teachers provide positive feedback on what the student did well aligned with their goals, which are aligned to the school-wide expectations. This increases positive adult attention and feedback. Finally, at the end of the day, the same staff member from the morning checks out with the student to reflect on the day. Check-in check-out's active ingredients are increased positive adult attention, prompts and pre-corrections, and feedback. This checkout includes looking at the points accumulated that can often be traded for privileges, activities, free time, etc. In line with the school family communication, the summary portion of the card goes home so the family can encourage and recognize success. The staff member collects that data and reviews the student progress weekly. As always, when we have an intervention, we monitor progress. This data will be used to tell if what we are doing is working, data shows an adequate response, or it isn't working yet, the data shows an inadequate response. In this case, Mr. Jones will deliver the intervention and progress will be checked for responsiveness in 2 weeks. In the standard protocol delivery of check-in, check-out, the progress monitoring is a card aligned to the 3 school-wide expectations. There is a column for each period or teacher to provide positive feedback. Every year, the teachers receive a quick booster tutorial about the appropriate use of this card to avoid common misuses, such as rehashing negatives during the feedback time rather than focusing on what the student did well. So for a student who may have not gotten much feedback previously, or maybe it was only corrective when they did wrong, now the feedback increases to multiple times throughout the day, and for each goal, focusing on what they did right. At the end of the day, during the checkout, looking at successes and struggles, we begin to add to what we know Elijah is struggling with. Mr. Jones takes anecdotal notes, and these details will be useful if we get to the diagnostic step, but more about that in a moment. Mr. Jones plans to meet with Elijah the next day to offer check-in, check-out as a plan and to see how Elijah feels about that. Together, they will create a goal and identify some reinforcers that matter to Elijah. Mr. Jones makes sure that Elijah knows that they are in this together, and if Elijah struggles, the entire team, teacher and family, will change what they are doing to support him until he is successful. Mr. Jones asks, "Does this sound good to you, Elijah?" And Elijah said yes. To monitor fidelity of implementation, Mr. Jones uses a brief self-assessment checklist. This will be important information for the team when determining if the intervention was effective for Elijah or if more intensity is needed. If check-in, check-out wasn't delivered as intended, the team will not know if Elijah didn't respond or if it was a result of not receiving the intervention as it was intended to be delivered. Mr. Jones also checks that all teachers checking in throughout the day have been trained on how to implement the feedback portion of check-in, check-out. He finds one class has a long-term sub, so he asks the principal to arrange for that substitute to be trained using the course on BridgeRI created for this purpose. The next step in the DBI or database individualization process is to review the progress monitoring data. The team with Mr. Jones used the check-in, check-out card to plot the data on a graph. On the first day of implementation, Elijah earned 47% of his total check-in, check-out points, far shy of the orange goal line. Also, since office discipline referrals were the indicators that Elijah was struggling, the progress monitoring card shows them in the green bar to note if the progress is successfully reducing the office discipline referrals. This is the next 2 weeks' worth of data added to the graph in the same manner. The team uses the graphed progress monitoring data to determine if the student was responsive or not responsive to the intervention. At the end of the 2-week timeline, the team reconvenes to review Elijah's progress and implementation data. Is this response adequate? Are we achieving our goal with Elijah or not? When the intervention is effective, we still aren't done. We'd work to move the student to self-management as we fade support in a systematic way. While many students do respond to a validated intervention program, we know some will not. These 3 to 5% of students will require Tier 3, the most intensive level of support, to be successful. In this second scenario, we will illustrate how DBI is used to intensify the intervention for a student that does not respond adequately to the validated intervention program delivered with fidelity. In this new scenario where Elijah isn't responding, although some progress was evident, Elijah continued to have office discipline referrals and met the 80% goal of his check-in, check-out points in only 4 days during a 2-week time frame. This intervention alone isn't adequate to meet our goal. The team notes how inconsistent the data is from day to day, even with the additional instruction, adult connection, feedback, and reinforcement. Because Elijah didn't respond to the intervention, the team moves to the next step of the DBI process, where the team engages in a diagnostic process to drill deeper and to identify what other needs might exist. Elijah's family is invited to the child-by-child team meeting. His parents are working and couldn't attend, but Mr. Jones called them in advance and gathered their input to include their thoughts in the meeting process. The team recognizes that all behavior has a function and kids do well if they can. The team first considers fidelity. Did we do what we said we would? Mr. Jones used the checklist to monitor his implementation of check-in, check-out, and Elijah has been present and engaged. Implementation fidelity isn't the issue. Elijah's existing check-in, check-out data is analyzed for patterns. Are there specific times of day, classes or settings, or maybe certain expectations that might indicate Elijah is struggling but in certain contexts? It was noted that work refusal may occur with work demands, but Elijah's academic skills are strong. If Elijah had the skills but wasn't performing, check-in, check-out likely would have been enough, but it wasn't. What they found was that there wasn't a particular class or setting. Elijah struggled the most with the behavioral expectation, be respectful, and the antecedents or problem situations tended to be where Elijah didn't agree with someone or didn't want to comply with a request. In the weeks since Elijah was first placed in check-in, check-out, the school implemented an SEL screener called SABRES. Elijah's score showed risk for social behavior problems, meaning that he displays behaviors that limit his or her ability to maintain age-appropriate relationships with peers and adults. Elijah didn't show risk for academic behavior problems and was just below the risk cut score for emotional behavior problems. After analyzing all existing data in a diagnostic process, the team hypothesizes that Elijah is a can't-do, that he has a skill deficit in social skills and emotional regulation. So when he struggles with the social skills, he struggles to emotionally regulate those emotions. In other words, when he has a problem with a peer or doesn't want to do his classwork due to his lagging social skills, he handles it poorly, upsetting others. That upsets him, and then he doesn't have the coping skills to self-regulate. As a result, he uses maladaptive behaviors to avoid. A can't-do requires explicit instruction in the area of the lagging skills. If the team had analyzed all existing data and still felt they needed more information, which this team did not, there are a variety of approaches they could have used, such as completing an informal FBA or FACS, or completing a formal FBA process, functional behavioral assessment. This is why child-by-child teams should have at least one team member with deep behavioral expertise and training. The next step in the DBI process is to use the hypothesis to plan an intervention adaptation. The team develops an individualized intervention plan that intensifies the intervention using the data-based individualization process of brainstorming ideas aligned to the hypothesis, ranking those ideas, and then action planning who and by when for each step that is planned to implement. The hypothesis is a can't-do, a skill deficit in social and emotional regulation. So the team added a social skills intervention that includes handling conflict or disagreement. They reviewed various research-based and promising programs available to them at their school and found I can problem solve to address Elijah's targets. If a few other students on the SEL screener also struggle in these skills, they may join Elijah in a small group setting. The school social worker, Mrs. Garcia, will provide this group intervention using the I Can Problem Solve program because this validated platform deeply addresses pro-social behavior and conflict resolution. This program includes modeling, role-playing, and peer feedback. Given Elijah's love of graphic novels, some of the role-playing will be presented that way. When Elijah learns these replacement behaviors and strengthens his lagging skills, the team believes he will be less likely to engage in the maladaptive behaviors. This plan will help everyone engaging with Elijah to be on the same page. Just like Mr. Jones with implementing check-in, check-out, fidelity is important. Mrs. Garcia will use this simple checklist as she implements and tracks Elijah's attendance and engagement. As always, we progress monitor. Now we're progress monitoring not only for check-in, check-out, but for the I Can Problem Solve program too. The check-in, check-out progress monitoring will move from the standard point card to one modified to fit the explicit instruction in the I Can Problem Solve social skills intervention. This also helps adults throughout the day to support Elijah's transfer of those skills across the various contexts. The progress monitoring graph will now include a phase line to indicate the intervention has been adapted. 2 weeks in, it doesn't look like Elijah is responding, but we know a can't do can take time for the explicit instruction to be learned and generalized into other settings. The team will reconvene in a few weeks to see if more adaptations are needed, continuing the data-based individualization process. With the cycle of adaptation, progress monitoring, and determining responsiveness.